Hey everyone, what's up? So last week I got the chance to sit down and check out this new upcoming game called Enshrouded. I saw about an hour's worth of gameplay and frankly came away pleasantly surprised. I wasn't sure what to expect with this one after watching the initial announcement trailer, as it did look a little rough if I'm being honest, but now having seen the game in action, taking a look at the combat, building, how the exploration and progression systems work in a full unedited gameplay session, a live demo basically, it's left me way more interested in the game. So I want to tell you about it. It is still clearly being made by a small team. In fact, according to their website, the developing studio is made up of just under 50 people. So yeah, the game does have some of the expected rough edges, but nevertheless, Enshrouded does appear promising from what I've seen. And if their past work, Portal Knights, is any indication, we might be looking at another solid indie title from Keen Games Studios. So what is Enshrouded? Well, this is a new open world survival action RPG. Their goal with this is to take some of the best elements of both the survival and RPG genres and then throw that into a voxel-based open world, giving players quite a bit of freedom in both how they explore but also how they build. The game is set in a post-apocalyptic fantasy world where a deadly fog has enshrouded everything, and this isn't purely cosmetic either, as the fog does play a pivotal role in the overall gameplay experience, which we'll discuss here in a moment. So you, as the player, have been brought back to life by a mysterious force called the Flame, and you are tasked with dispelling the fog and rebuilding the world. Now, in typical survival faction, after creating a character, you spawn in with absolutely nothing, and then you go about the well-worn loop of gathering materials, crafting tools, gear, and weapons, which you'll use to build bases, explore the world, and fight the various foes within. Besides the gathering and crafting loop, survival mechanics are similar to that of Valheim, where you won't die if you neglect to eat or drink, but rather doing so grants you significant buffs, of which they said this is done to be rewarding rather than punishing. If you have to chop wood but don't have food, it won't be an issue, but if you do have food, it'll just be easier and more efficient. I liked this in Valheim far better than some other survival games that punish you with like life loss or death even for not maintaining hunger and thirst, so I'm glad that they've gone this route with Enshrouded as well. I think it's a good way to manage these survival elements without feeling too punishing. Now, you'll find food and other items, resources that you'll collect and use for all this stuff. Some of the food can be eaten directly, like various berries and plants, but then there's also campfires that will let you craft basic foods on the go. Later on, you'll have things like cooking stations to combine for more complex and better food ingredients. Now, the demo that we saw, that we got to take a look at, took place shortly after the game's tutorial. The presenter walked us through the basics, which I've now covered here in the video, and then dove right into the gameplay, showing us examples of how base building, exploration, questing, and crafting, as well as combat works. And we began with the exploration. Right near the starting area where you'll be building your first small abode was this deep trench that was covered in fog. Now, the fog is dispersed throughout the entire game world. It basically fills all of the lowland areas with a difficult to see through mist. While in these regions, you become what's called enshrouded, which effectively gives you a timer, kind of like diving, limiting how long you have to explore. So we saw the player enter a foggy area, as I mentioned, right by the starting base building location. A timer then appeared at the top of the screen, which looked to last anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes. And as he was exploring, picking up some resources and items, opening chests, lighting lanterns, he eventually actually came across an hourglass. Interacting with it reset the timer, extending the duration that he could stay in the fog. Apparently, these are going to be located throughout most of the foggy regions. It's really just a matter of finding them. If you don't find them, it just means you're going to have to head back out of the fog to basically catch your breath or get out of the dangerous, deadly poison, I don't know. So we were told that many parts of the world, as you move further away from the starting zone into the new biomes towards major points of interest, a lot of these spots will require you passing through these foggy regions. And as said earlier, and as the name of the game implies, this all plays a rather pivotal role into the overall gameplay loop and experience. I think it's also worth noting that this is an entirely handcrafted game, unlike, say, Valheim or Minecraft with procedurally generated seeds that build up. world that is different for every player. Enshrouded has a static structure, so my world looks the exact same as your world when we first boot up the game and enter into our own server. That is until we start breaking things down, building up structures, terraforming the landscape, because absolutely everything at its base built out of voxels. But going back to those foggy areas, these aren't just regions to pass through as you're going to other locations that you have to just make your way through, trying not to suffocate basically. They're also full of ton of valuable things to collect, like upgrades for gear and weapons, special resources, skill points, and quest objectives. Tons of stuff that are going to motivate you to enter and explore these areas. Then there's also enemies and bosses to fight. At its core, the game's combat is the typical action RPG combat system. You've got a lock-on mechanic letting you focus a particular target. There are light, heavy, and combo attacks. You can block and dodge. There's also a parry system. If done properly, it stuns the enemy, opening them up to a finisher. There is also stealth, where you can crouch, becoming harder to detect while in the open, or if you crouch in bushes and certain debris, you'll actually be fully concealed, completely invisible. And this plays into the fact that there are sneak attacks letting you deal massive damage, which will, against weaker enemies, typically result in a one-shot. It's all pretty straightforward in terms of what you would expect from an action combat system. While some of the game's animations are a bit stiff, I felt this way when seeing that first trailer, and even when seeing this full gameplay demo. All in all, it seems fairly well done, fairly well executed, although I'll have to reserve final judgment for when I actually get some hands-on time. It looked like it played pretty well. We also did see a boss fight, so after going back up to base to prep for the encounter, where he crafted additional arrows and bandages, grabbed potions, and then got some food buffs, increasing his health and stamina, he then headed back into the ravine, going deeper down into this cave. On the way there, he came across a grouping of enemies, which actually proved to be a difficult encounter. There was a mix of melee ranged and casters. They actually overwhelmed him. He was successful on attempt number 2 by focusing down targets and with a few well-timed parries, but it's good to see that there is actual challenge present here. You're not just steamrolling everything. After doing that, he then headed down further into this area that was called the Elixir Well. At the bottom of the well was this large living plant and a mini boss. So the mini boss was a big creature basically. He was carrying a two-handed blade, and from what I saw, all he really did was a variety of just big swinging attack patterns and a ground slam. There weren't like phases or a ton of mechanics here, just big attacks for the player to dodge. So you dodge the attacks, you counter with your own, whittle down the health bar, and then you win. It was a pretty straightforward fight. All in all, it took the player about 30 seconds to take on this, I guess what I would call a mini boss. Killing the boss dropped a legendary axe. It had pretty strong base stats, well above what he could craft at the time, as well as some additional passive abilities, which we were told would be unlocked by leveling up the weapon. So he equipped the axe and then used it to chop down what was called the Shroud Root. It was this big living plant, the source of the fog. Taking it down lifted the fog in the entire region, granted an additional skill point for him to use in the skill tree. We'll touch on progression here in a second. And then also we were told at this point, this makes it way easier for you to explore the area, as makes sense because you no longer have that time limit of what sort of functions like an oxygen or a timer system. So you focus on finding the source of the fog, clearing the fog, and then having that entire area to explore. And I gotta say, having seen it in action as a gameplay mechanic, I think this fog system is really neat. I also think it makes this really cool immersive element as you venture into these misty areas, kind of stumbling through with low field of vision until you eventually find the source that you clear, and then going back through that area now that you can see and now that you're no longer on a timer, and doing more exploration, finding the resources, finding the loot, taking out the rest of the enemies that you happen to miss. I also realized as they continued to go on and later in the presentation when they showed more of the game's world, with all of these lowland fog regions, that there's a ton of vertical play space. They really make use not just of the horizontal landscape, but of the up and down of the vertical, with lots of deep ravines and lots of high mountainsides and cliffs for you to explore. I really like the amount of verticality and vertical exploration that we're seeing here, of which you can traverse more quickly with a few tools. We saw examples of a gliding suit, sort of works like a flying squirrel. There was a grapple hook, which lets you pull yourself up to anything within range. And then in the talent tree, you were able to unlock abilities like a double jump, a blink, and a few other traversal skills. And you can also combine these, so like you can double jump before using your glider, letting you go further, or you could blink across a gap before using your grapple hook to grab onto something just out of reach. Overall, it seems like there's a ton of different freedom of movement here. Even more so though, as previously mentioned, because the entire world is voxel, meaning you can dig anywhere. So you can dig tunnels around a door or through a wall. You can dig straight down into a cave rather than having to search for its entrance. You could dig a ramp up the side of a mountain to reach the top. You could dig a hole in the floor of a building to get the jump on an unsuspecting enemy. You get the picture. It is a voxel world. You can bust through just about anything in the world from what I saw. Although there are limitations to your ability, certain materials will require stronger tools in order for you to break through. You also have a stamina gauge that depletes after a few swings, preventing you from just non-stop swinging forever instantly, which overall I think is good. This will stop players from completely breaking the game's level and world design when they first start playing, but as we progress and the character gets stronger, we get more stamina and better tools, we will become better and more efficient. Now, the game mainly has that loop. You start off in an area, you've got your basic tutorial, you build your first base, you go to the nearby foggy area, you clear that, you do some exploration, and it's got that sandboxy nature where they're wanting you to naturally find things, with you just going out into the world, finding and doing stuff as you happen to stumble across it. But in addition to that, there are more traditional structured RPG systems as well. So you've got a journal that's going to show you various quests that you found, the tutorials and lore, which also play into the exploration. So you'll get quests from what are known as the Flame. This is basically the player guide. Think what Navi is to Link in The Legends of Zelda. And there are also other NPCs that you will come across while exploring, some related to crafting, others just giving you side quests and additional things to do. There are lore books that you'll find, and these will give you hints about locations of things like hidden treasures. And then there's also a bunch of different progression systems. So you start off by creating a character, you will have some visual customization and pick a name, but outside of that, you're basically a clean slate. You don't pick a class. Your entire playstyle and your specialization is all based off of the gear and weapons you equip. These will come with a typical array of stats like different damage and attack types on weapons, various attributes on gear, but then on top of that, there is a skill tree. So as you play, you'll gain experience leveling up and unlocking skill points. Also, doing things in the game will give you skill points, like as mentioned, when you clear a fog region, and then you spend those points in the skill tree. This is a web of interconnected nodes that branch out in every direction. So you start in the center with these yellow, more generalized nodes. These just give you some all-around useful abilities and passive bonuses. And then from there, it branches out into 3 different directions, which generally fill the 3 archetypes of a warrior, ranger, and mage. You select from a variety of active skills, passive skills, and attributes, giving you additional boosts to your character, and you can mix and match these however you want to create whatever sort of build combination, pulling from the 3 archetypes. All you have to do is make sure you're connected. You can go wherever you want. If you want a little bit of mage, a little bit of warrior, if you want full ranger, full warrior, full mage, whatever kind of combination you please. It's really cool. And to give you some examples of these different types of abilities, some of the active skills you could unlock included the ability to double jump, the blink, there was a jump attack and shrapnel attack, some passive skills like ambush, which gives you double damage when attacking unaware enemies. Calm spirit would pacify any animals within 50 meters of your character. There was this thing called shroud filter, where dealing magic damage would give you a 15% chance to restore 30 seconds on your shroud timer. And then there were some utility skills like this merciless attack, where stunned enemies could now be executed. There was quality gear, which made it so that tool degradation happened 20% slower, or lumberjack, which made it so that axes dealt more damage against wood. You get the picture, a lot of what you might expect, and the combinations are as you please. They also did say there will be respecking should you want to change your build midway through a playthrough, or if you group up with people and you want to specialize, like one person plays the tank, another person plays the mage or supporty character, you'll have that option through respecking. Of course, it wouldn't be a survival game without base building and crafting, and the game's got plenty of that. The basics of it are like the terrain. Base building is entirely voxel based, although they do have these larger templates where you can place massive chunks of floor, walls, roofs, etc. But then from there, you can go in and edit and fine detail block by block, just like any voxel game, just like Minecraft, for example. Things will then also seamlessly blend together. So if you place a big wall and then remove 4 tiny blocks for a small window, it's actually going to naturally frame that window. From what they showcased nice. This was very well done. There are also going to be things like decorations and other items to place down. There are trophies you can get from the various bosses and things that you hunt. Placing those in your house will grant you buffs to the player, what's known as the comfort level. And then you're also able to craft multiple bases, besides being a place for you to put down crafting stations, the NPCs, a spot to rest and buff up. These will also act as fast travel locations, letting you quickly move around the map. And then crafting systems, pretty much what you expect. You can craft things on the go, like field crafting basically. These will be the basic necessities. But then there's NPCs, like the blacksmith will be one of the first ones you find, letting you make the introductory level of weapons and armor. And then as you go further down the line, you'll get these specialized crafting stations that are used to make better items. You'll unlock crafting NPCs by finding their souls in the world, and then you summon them, at which point you can tell them basically to stay at any point in your base. There's things like farming, where you can plant various trees, herbs, food things that will grow, water them and they'll grow. There'll be rare resources out in the world, sometimes located in caves at the top of mountains in these misty regions, or you might have to dig down into the ground to find certain rare ores and materials. Like other survival games of this type, Enshrouded will have servers, so you can start up your own private server, you can join public servers. These can be saved locally, or you can spin up instances. Essentially, you can rent servers that will be constantly running for you and your friends to join. There's also multiplayer co-op. This is not a single player game. In fact, they host up to 16 players per server, they said. You're able to invite people to join your world where they can bring their character with them. They have stated that characters and world saves will be completely separate, so they can take their character, help you out, get some progression from their character, but then go back to their world save and keep all of the progress that they made. And unfortunately, for those of you who might be more competitively inclined, I do have to inform you, there is no PvP in the game. They have said this might be something they revisit later down the road, but it will not be there for the initial early access launch. Speaking of which, yes, it's coming to early access. It will be launching later this year. No exact time window yet, but some point in the year. They're planning to have roughly a year's worth of time in early access, during which they intend to add additional biomes, enemies, points of interest, resources, recipes, equipment, weapons, skills, building options, just basically more of everything that's already in the game. Although the game doesn't have a set early access release, we do know that beta testing will be beginning in just a couple of weeks, sometime very, very soon. If you're interested, you can register over on their website. And that is pretty much everything that I saw and what I've learned about Enshrouded so far. As I mentioned, when I saw the initial trailer, I wasn't all too impressed. Everything looked a little bit janky. And while the game does certainly have a level of jank that comes from them building such a large game, being such a small studio, I actually really like the general layout and structure. A lot of the systems and mechanics, the combat seems competent. I haven't played it. This was a hands-off demo. I just got to see all of this stuff. It was live, it was unedited, but I didn't actually get hands-on time myself. So I'm obviously, as always, I'm reserving final judgment into how the game feels, how it feels to play, the gameplay loop. From what I saw, it does seem pretty interesting, and I definitely think this is a game worth keeping an eye on. I am interested in playing it. I'm going to try to check out the beta here once it boots up in just a couple of weeks. But that does it for me today. Thanks for joining me for this Enshrouded preview. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.